Afternoon, everybody. I'm Councillor Parivas, the Chairman of the Joint Public Protection Committee, and I welcome you to the meeting. The other members of the committee in attendance are Councillor John Harrison, the Vice Chairman, Councillor Chris Bowring, Councillor Hilary Cole, Councillor James Cole, and Councillor John Porter. Councillor Abdul Lois from Woking Borough Council is also in attendance as an observer to the meeting. There are also a number of officers in attendance to advise the meeting, and they include Paul Instey, Head of Public Protection and Culture, John Ashworth, WBC Executive Director for Place, Rosalind Gator, Commercial Team Manager, Kevin Gibbs, Bratton Forest Deputy for Delivery, Deputy Director, that is. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Kevin Gibbs, BFC Executive Director for Delivery. Damien James, Bratton Forest Assistant Director for Contract Services. Claire Lawrence, I don't think she's with us at the moment. George Lawrence, Residential Team Manager. Sean Murphy, is Sean with us now? I'm not sure. Public Protection Manager, and Chris Trail on the list as well, Woking Director of Place and Growth.
Chairman, if I may, it's Claire Lawrence here. I'll just let you know I am here, and I'm afraid Chris can't join us until about 5 o'clock, by which time we might be already finished. So.
Thank you, Claire. I'm also assisted by Stephen Chard, the clerk to the meeting and the Zoom host. I will also now ask Stephen Chard to give some reminders about the way we conduct meetings via Zoom. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, standard Zoom reminders are being shown on screen. In addition to those points, please ask members to make a note of the meeting ID, which you can find on the top left-hand side of your screen. You'll see it with a marked with a small I symbol. This will be of assistance if you experience any technical difficulties and need to join the meeting by telephone. Please ensure that you've clicked participants at the bottom of the screen so you can see a list of the attendees on the right-hand side. If anyone wishes to speak, please use the raised hand that you'll find at the bottom of the participants list. This will give an indication against your name that you wish to speak. The Chairman will invite you to speak in the order he then deems most appropriate. Once you've finished speaking, please lower your hand. If you've telephoned in to speak, you won't be able to signal. So once everyone who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, I'll ask the Chairman to invite anyone who is telephoned in. Any voting necessary will take place by a physical show of hands. If it's necessary to adjourn the meeting at any point, the Chairman will do so and will advise the committee of the revised date and time of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you'll be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting, otherwise a fresh appointment will be sent out to you. Do members have any questions about the meeting, how it will be conducted before we proceed? No, thank you. Okay,
thank you very much, Stephen. Move on to item number 1, which is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, sir. I've received an apology from Councillor John Porter.
All right.
And I'm wondering if Councillor Turrell is here as his substitute.
And we've already had an apology from Chris.
Yeah, I can certainly confirm I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Right, okay. Councillor Swell, thank you very much. And so moving on to item 2, which is minutes, pages 1 to 8. And can I ask members if you're willing to accept the minutes of the previous meeting as an accurate record of the meeting? Okay. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder of the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of September, please? Proposer?
Councillor James Cole and Councillor Hilary Cole has a hand.
Second.
That's the second, yeah.
Thank you. Please can members indicate by raising their actual hand, if they agree that the minutes can be signed as a true an accurate record of the previous meeting.
Thank you very much.
Is that unanimous?
Indeed.
Nobody opposing and no abstentions. Okay. Please sign the meeting, the minutes. Okay, could be good. Moving on to item number 3, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask the clerk if we have any declarations of interest?
I've not been notified of any in advance of the meeting.
Thank you. Item 4, public questions. Are there any public questions?
None received for this meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. And item 5 is future plan. We are mainly to discuss note future items for the committee. If that's okay. Any discussions required at all? Okay. So we move on to item 6 then. That's the fee policy for relevant protected sites under caravan sites and mobile homes legislation, pages 9 to 26. And I believe Rosalind Gator is to introduce the report. Over to you, Rosalind.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. What I'm going to present to you today basically is an updated fee policy for relevant protected sites, which are park homes and caravan sites, mobile home legislation. My intention is that if you approve today, I'll take this to the licensees, that's the caravan site licensees, as a consultation and return with it in March to be approved so that the new fees come in from the 1st of April. I'll quickly go through the changes that are in this fee policy. There's already an existing fee policy that we've been using. As I say, what I've done is just updated some of the elements to it. The first one is the annual fee for the sites. At the minute, that has been set at £14 per unit on sites. That's based on options that have been put in the Department of Communities and Local Government fee setting guidance. That's that £14 has been the fee for caravan sites for some time now. In that DCLG fee setting guidance, there are 2 options for setting annual fees. The first is a set fee per hour for all units, and that's what we have with the £14 per unit that we set the scheme up with. The second is a calculation that's based basically on national set times for the administration of the site licence, plus national set times for the inspection of the sites. And those are banded together and multiplied by the hourly rate of the organisation, which for us in PPP for next year has been set at £59 per hour. Now, I've put in one of the appendices, Appendix C, some benchmarking data for annual sites that I've had a look at, because I wanted to see how we compare with our sites with other local authorities. You may have noticed that actually with the present option 1 that we have of £14 an hour, the fees appear higher than some of the other local authorities, which would suggest then that we would move to option 2, which is more in line with others. But as I've put in the report, actually, I did an exercise looking at the live data, looking at the actual caravan sites that we have in each of the areas. And it actually suggests that the option 2 means that the larger sites pay less, but the smaller sites actually are going to be paying more. In one case, the larger sites were paying as much as £5,201 less than they do presently. while the smaller sites can be paying up to £319 more. I've done more of a breakdown if people want to hear it, but overall, basically, the majority of our sites, because they're smaller, I think option one is probably one of the fairer option, because, as I say, the others unfairly target the smaller sites, while the larger sites would get a reduction. So, as I say, what we've put in the report is to go for option one, which is what we currently use, and remain at the £14 per unit for the sites. If you look at it in terms of overall income for PPP, actually it does work out that option one, which is the £14 per hour, is 2,000 more as income than option two. So in terms of the income, there's only £2,000 between the two, option one and option two, but option one does bring in slightly more income. The second part of the report talks about new application fees. At present, we've set that at £16 per unit plus a set fee of £440. This is what we have as our previous fee setting as well. One difference that we are proposing to bring in is, and again, this is due to the benchmarking data that we've got, is to cap the £16 per unit at 200 units. The local government, the DCLG, use 200 units quite regularly as their cap units, and that's why we've chosen 200 units. At the minute, we only have 3 sites that are actually larger than 200 units. So in terms of what new sites would be affected, I don't think there's going to be many that will come in over that. But I think it's probably a fairer way of doing it to set that. The other change that I brought in is we had a set fee for an alteration of a license, a set fee for a variation of a license. What I've done is amalgamated those two, and basically to make it more transparent and to be fairer, I've set that just at the hourly rate for the officer, which again will be £59 per hour. Because the ranges of alterations can be something that's very small and a simple license, right up to major changes and complex licenses. So again, to have a set fee for that didn't seem fair. So what we're doing is that where there's more work, the fee will be higher. The policy also gives some clarity on the route that we're going to take for non-payment. In the private sector housing policy that I took to JPPC in September, we detailed the direction that we would be taking with private sector housing and with site licenses, that we'd be starting to look at more formal enforcement action where there's non-compliance. So in this policy, I've laid out that where there's non-payment, we would start to look at what the government legislation and guidance says, and that's basically that we apply to a first-tier tribunal for an order that requires the payment. Then, if that order isn't met within 3 months, we can apply back to the first-tier tribunal for an order to revoke the site license. So again, I put that in the fee policy. So what I propose to do is send that fee policy now to the caravan site licensees and ask them to give any comments they'd like to on that, provided you approve the direction that we're going tonight. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Rosalie. That's very comprehensive. Thank you for that presentation. Can I invite members now to ask any questions, clarifications to Rosalind, please, by raising your hand? And Stephen can check who's...
Yeah, 2 hands raised, Chairman. Councillor Bowring and Councillor Harrison.
Okay. Councillor Bowring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 questions. First of all, why is this why are we setting fees for 2021 to 22 after the point where we've already been through the three councils ratifying that fees and charges are acceptable?
Yeah, we've been doing quite a bit of work this year on caravan sites. Part of that was to bring to you the private sector housing policy in September. So we knew that this policy also had to come to you. So we, the first time I could get it in to get the work done for this was at this meeting, unfortunately. Also, we've been looking quite a lot at the caravan sites and their fees this year.
But I think this would have to go through the licensing committees, wouldn't it? And then Woking Borough Council would have to go through the executive, then it would have to go to full council, which is a bit awkward time-wise. I'm just wondering how we're going to deal with that.
I think from what I gather from what I've been talking about, what we can do is if it goes through and gets approved here, I can get it changed through other committees and get the fees updated, but I'd need to check on that. I'm not sure if Sean has any more information on that.
Yeah, I think, Chair, if I may, the difficulty is the timing of the March meeting. So obviously Wokingham have already set their fees for 21-22. I mean, we have got a set of fees for next year. So, I mean, it sets a direction for the other two authorities. The final sign-off in terms of the proposal, a meeting in March, basically would be too late to set the fees for the other two authorities as well for 21-22, because obviously those meetings normally take place at the end of February, beginning of March. So I mean, it depends what the plan is really, whether basically the plan is to implement it with a view to the next full financial year, or whether to implement it with respect to this coming financial year, in which case it would need to go through an additional process in each authority to get it into place. And it would probably vary from authority to authority.
Thank you, Sean. I think
That's the decision we need to take tonight, which municipal year we wish to start with.
I guess, Chair, that you could make that decision at the point where it comes back in March. I mean, at the moment we're consulting on a methodology, really, aren't we? Not on a set of fees. And effectively, there are two options on a methodology, and well, not methodology. I mean, there is a fees linked to the methodology, but I guess that decision doesn't necessarily need to be made tonight as to when these take effect.
Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. I can't seem to put my hand up, so I might be able to help here from at least from a Wokingham perspective. We have approved fees as part of our meeting in November. What my understanding is, this is not changing the fee, it's actually changing how we apply the fees. Is that correct, Sean?
I think Sean has already indicated that we're looking at.
Sorry, yeah, it's probably better one addressed to Rosalind, but this is how the rate. This is about the application, isn't it, Rosalind? Understanding.
Yeah, it's some will change. Some will just change with the hourly rate, which is normal anyway. The one that will change is the cap at the for the new sites, and the combination of alteration and variation set at an hourly rate rather than a fixed fee rate.
Right. In which case, I think what Chairman, what's being said is that the this can go through with the other two councils in their budget setting process, which doesn't happen until January. But because Wokingham take their fees and charges early, we can have a choice as to whether or not we want to have to go through another process at Wokingham Council, or whether or not we just apply these fees as from the next financial year and then go through a process as part of next year's budget setting. But as Rosalind said, because of the policy document that was being prepared, then they haven't been able to address the fees and charges and how they would apply in the methodology for that. So I hope that that's clear, and I hope that I've reflected the position for the other councils.
Thanks, Claire. Councillor Harrison, do you have a view?
I did have 2 other questions, but you come back to me.
I'll come back to you, Chris.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bath. Can we be certain that there is going to be, enough money raised through this charging mechanism to do the level of inspections that we really need to do in order to cover the number of hours that officers are spending visiting caravan and mobile home sites? And the second part of this is that it seems that some of our sites are very well run. We don't have many problems. A very small minority cause a lot of the issues. And is there a mechanism within this that can make sure that the additional cost of policing those, the burden falls more heavily on those who are actually causing the problems rather than on the whole community of caravan and mobile home sites?
Thank you. Going back to Councillor Bowering, you wanted to ask some more questions?
Yes, I was just looking at the table in the summary, section 1.2. Can't find the page. Page 11. It refers to the national average administration time and inspection times. I just wondered how our and the PPP's administration and national time compared with that national average. Are we better or not so good as the national average?
Rosalind, do you want to take that one?
What I can do is look at the national average, because as Councillor Harrison points out, some of the sites are much better run and do take an awful lot less time at them. So I'll run some reports and bring that back to you. But in terms of the site inspections, the annual renewal, yes, it does give time to do the site inspections. So what we have to do is make sure that the site inspections get done basically once in the year. There's the administration time and the site inspection time that we've factored into that £14 per unit. And if you see, it basically then will be that the number, I suppose that the bigger the sites, the more money that they'll pay in to get that done, and the more time we would spend on sites. In terms of the minority of sites causing us the issues, there's also part of the policy is about enforcement action and actually charging for enforcement action. Now that again is something that we're quite keen to look into this year, because if, as I say, if there are sites that aren't complying, and once again, once we do the site visits this year, we've actually done quite a lot of work auditing all of the sites that we've got this year. So we've got quite detailed information now about where the sites are, where we're going to, I suppose, factor our visits for this year. What we want to do is, once these sites have finished, once the inspections are finished for this year, actually go back and see whether there's any enforcement action we take that we can charge for. So we'll be looking into that as well, because as you say, the ones that are causing the problems should be the ones that I suppose pay more money. And there is part of the policy, I think it's point, I'm just trying to look up the policy here. Yes, in the
Would it be point 8?
Yeah, just yes, point 8, enforcement action. So again, there are compliance notices and we can charge for those. So we will look into that and actually, as I say, get the ones that are causing the majority of the problems to comply that way.
Thank you.
Okay. But generally, we're sort of fairly in kilter with national averaging, I hope.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman, that's all.
That's fine. Okay. if we are happy to proceed to look at the recommendation.
There are some, sorry, Chairman, there are some more hands raised. So Councillor Hilary Cole and Paul Anstey have their hands raised to come in.
Councillor Cole, Hilary Cole.
Yeah, thank you. These fees and charges don't apply to gypsy and traveller sites, do they? There's nothing in the document that says anything about gypsy and traveller sites. So are they treated separately?
These only relate to where they are licensed sites, so relevant protected sites. At the minute, the sites that we have are as I say, the licensed sites in the 3 areas. There's some sites that are exempt from that, and that would probably be the traveller sites. But what we're doing this year is, as I say, looking at the unlicensed sites and sites that don't need to be licensed, just to make sure that where the license exists, it should, and where a license doesn't exist, we get it licensed.
Okay.
Well, you've not answered my question. Is it a different set of rules for gypsy and traveller sites to this proposal that's before us tonight?
Yeah, the licensing regime wouldn't apply.
Thank you.
Okay. Paul Anstey was the other hand, Stephen?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So just to hopefully for a bit of clarification on what the options are around this. If you recall from previous discussions around fees and charges, what we said was that at various opportunities, we would take forward proposals that improve the level of transparency and information relevant to different fees and charges that are on our list. And in terms of the timing on this one, what I would say is that the work that we're doing here is to, one, if you like, put a marker down to say that we're going to go and engage with the trade, the various businesses that would be affected and the homes that would be captured within the scope of this suggested policy. So we'll be able to give you some feedback in the new year as to what they think about the logic that we're applying. So at this stage, no fees are being asked to be set because we need to hear what the consultation responses tell us. So there's no pressure in terms of the overlap with other decisions that we've made across the 3 partner authorities. And then the second part to that is once we do have the results of that consultation in, we can then advise the committee and the partner authorities individually whether or not we think it's sensible to proceed with a recommendation to ask for fees and charges to be changed. And part of that judgment call for us would be what we consider to be a challenge risk if we didn't change them on the basis that we've done that work and done the consultation. And then the second thing, as Ros has mentioned in her summary, is that realistically here, we're not talking about a net position change for the budget. It's really about the distribution of those charges across the sector. So it's about making sure that we can demonstrate absolute fairness wherever possible. So just in terms of the key concepts here, whether or not we change the fees and charges is one thing, but that doesn't have a massive impact on the budget, but it does have an impact on the sector in terms of the distribution of that income. So they're the things that we can then debate in a little bit more detail and probably get some more clarity once we've had the consultation responses back in February time. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other members wanting to ask any questions?
There are no more hands raised, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So for the recommendations, page 9, we will need a proposer and a seconder, please. Do we have a proposer?
Councillor James Cole.
Councillor Cole. And a seconder, please.
Councillor Harrison.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, so the recommendations proposed and seconded are that the committee notes the amended fee policy for relevant protected sites, that the committee approves the options used for determining the level of fee to be charged, that the committee approves the direction whereby the policy will be put to consultation with caravan site licensees and any other relevant parties, the results of which we brought back to the March meeting of the JPPC for discussion, with a view to implementing the fee structure from the 1st of April 2021. Please can members indicate by raising their hands if they are in acceptance of the recommendations. Thank you. Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're moving over to item number 7 now, which is surveillance and implementation of RIPA within the PPP. That's pages 27 to 66. And I believe, Paul, you're going to present that report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so just for clarification, as a result of previous discussions through the committee, it was felt that it would be helpful for members to hear a little bit more detail about some of the practical implementation of our use of RIPA, so Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is a piece of legislation that we use on occasion, and also just how surveillance is run in the in course of investigations by officers. The principle here is to provide a flavour. It's not an in-depth report, and it hopefully just shines a light on some of the areas of work that we do that don't often get a mention. So I'll take you through it in summary, and I'm happy to take questions. To start with, it's worth noting that each of the 3 partner authorities are audited externally by a government body called IPCO, which is the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. That is usually conducted by a judge or somebody very senior in the judiciary, and they look at the variety of policies that are brought into effect, and also how the individual departments, so not just PPP, but the council as a whole, how the policies are then applied, and basically to make sure that we're meeting the regulatory tests in terms of our use of those powers, because you can imagine that it's quite extensive in its potential scope. So we need to make sure that we're not doing anything unreasonable in any of our investigations. Also, just to talk a little bit about the fact that we obviously use cameras, whether that be a body-worn camera or CCTV in some of our operations, and the fact that codes of practice and government guidance is also applicable in those circumstances. So we have quite significant governance around how we use that in our investigations. And then thirdly, to just look at the fact that we engage with the National Anti-Fraud Network, which is often acronyms, lots of acronyms in this part of the world. This is called NAFN, which is essentially a local authority conglomerate where lots of people pay into a central pot to enable there to be a level of expertise and oversight on the type of work that primarily trading standards, but it does broaden out to other areas such as fly tipping. So basically to make sure that we're, as I say, using our powers responsibly and carrying out effective investigations. I think it's fair to say that of the 3 audits that we've been in receipt of, I would say in the main that they've been complementary. I've put in the report some of the direct quote feedback from the letters we've received from the auditors. And I think that the work that's been done across the PPP has very much helped each of the 3 partner authorities in upskilling both members of the PPP, members themselves, senior officers in the councils, legal departments, and also other departments that have used but infrequently the various powers and practices that are covered within the scope of the papers. So I think what I would just add to that in terms of things that bring it to life, which hopefully is the easiest way to describe it, is we do quite a lot of work now because of the nature of online trading through social networks. So we have to make sure that when we are asking officers to conduct investigations, that they do so in a way that is proportionate, and we have a variety of internal checks and balances to make sure that if essentially doing undercover work, I'll use that term, that we're doing so in an appropriate fashion, and that also the data that we collect in any of those investigations is handled in a secure and sensitive way, because again there are potential risks around picking up information about individuals' personal information that needs to be dealt with appropriately. So the PPP within its day-to-day work has to make sure that it's covering all of the bases on this. And that adds to why we have such expertise in the department around case management, managers obviously providing oversight to investigating officers, and investigating officers knowing when it's appropriate to use these powers. Obviously, in terms of things like body-worn cameras, which again we use in very sparingly, but it can assist in certain high-risk situations, and also provide some real-time evidence that can be helpful when we're producing cases that find themselves into the court process. And then obviously CCTV, which many of you may be familiar with. It's about not the CCTV that's in public space where it's clear that it is in operation, because obviously that is often signed. It's often to do with recordings and how those recordings are used, and managing the equipment that we bring in and employ across the council. So again, it's an area where PPP is a user of this policy, but it broadens out to the wider council responsibilities as well. And then I think what I would just sort of bring back to in terms of some of the key policy areas, and in the report I've cited the West Berkshire one, but it could have been either of the three partner authorities. It just so happens that the West Berkshire one is the one I'm most familiar with. There's very little variation, if any, between them, to be honest. But essentially, it just identifies who the key people are within the organisations who need to be aware of what activities taking place, and essentially on a year-to-year basis, keeping a clear audit trail of when those powers have been used. And I'm pretty sure that I put somewhere in the report that we've used it on a handful of occasions, if that. So again, it's demonstrating that we have all these powers, but we take them very seriously, and we only use them when we absolutely have to. And then finally, just to play out some scenarios where this would apply for the PPP. We've carried out a number of different operations, and examples include investigating counterfeit goods and unsafe products through platforms like eBay. We've used it to deal with rogue car dealers. We've looked into illegal waste carriers and unlicensed waste carriers, and also to deal with incidents of fly tipping. We've also, on a routine basis, and for many years, dealt with test purchasing for underage sales. And that all builds a picture about some of the occasions where the policies have had to be considered by management in order to proceed with particular operations and investigations. I think I've talked about NAF, and probably the last thing to just mention is that we also deal with quite a lot of communications data, and the fact that in amongst our investigations, it requires us to look into things like telephone records to identify potential sort of persons of interest, shall we say, and that gives us the ability to track down things like last known addresses, so that we can communicate and make it clear that we've carried out all reasonable inquiries with the people that might be involved in potential offences, alleged offences. And as I say, I think overall, my take on it, certainly from the board's perspective, is that all of this has been conducted in a very professional way. The PPP has a very good reputation in this regard, and it's led to what has been, as far as I'm concerned, almost exemplary, if not exemplary, track record for all of our investigations where we've ever used this. I think Sean was still on 100%, 100% successful prosecution record as far as PPP is concerned. So from my perspective, I think we use this very well, and I hope that's been useful.
Thank you, Paul. That's a very good comprehensive capturing of the summary there. Surveillance is a very important part of the PPP work, and we do use cameras, etc., and we've got to be seen to be doing everything professionally. So can I ask members to see if they've got any questions for Paul or clarifications?
Councillor Bowring, Chairman.
Councillor Bowring, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at page 33 where Lord Justice Fulford had written to West Berkshire Council and Sir Brian.
We lost you, Chris.
It would appear so, Chairman. If
we've lost
Councillor,
Chris, I think.
Yeah. If Councillor Barry can hear us, the best. Hang on, he might be back with us.
Yes, yeah. Can you hear us, Councillor Barry?
Did you not hear me?
Yeah. Well, you froze.
Oh, did I? Oh, did you not hear the question?
Please repeat.
Oh, right. I was looking at page 33, and the two quotes from Lord Justice Fulford and Sir Brian Leveson to two of the councils, and it sort of looks as if they're not aware that the whole thing is being coordinated through the PPP, which is surely doing most of the work.
Okay.
They're aware that the PPP is doing this, aren't they? It seems strange that two senior lawyers would write separately to two of the councils.
Yeah, I'm sure Sean might want to add to it, but I can assure you that they are aware of the PPP and that each of the inspections had a link to varying degrees. I think what I would just remind in terms of the context of why these audits take place is that they do it as individual councils because it's the council as a whole and the application of the legislation as a whole, as opposed to just the bits that the PPP are responsible for. So although Sean's been involved heavily across each of the three authorities, it is done through councils as a whole, but I'll defer to Sean on detail.
Chair, if I may, yeah, there is a common thread across the three authorities. So the policies and the responsibility lies with each of the authorities. But the common thread across the three authorities is in fact this service. So I mean, I have attended all three authorities' audits at various points in the last cycle of audits. And we are able to have that conversation basically with the inspectors to talk about basically how we operate it, because you've got interesting kind of nuances here. For example, we may be investigating a matter in Wokingham, but obviously the employees, for example, are West Berkshires. So we need to look at basically where the responsibility and liability for some of this lies. The other important thing about this is what we've tried to do is to work across the authorities. Sorry, not just across the authorities, but within the authorities. And if, for example, we did a lot of work on social media across Bracknell Forest recently in readiness for the recent audit that was carried out, because obviously it is an authority-wide issue. It's quite often people think, well, they think about enforcement, what do they think about? They think about trading standards, they think about licensing. But the reality is that if you're not careful, basically surveillance can touch many aspects of the authority. And it's not just about the carrying out of surveillance, it's about making sure that you don't carry out surveillance accidentally, within the definition of law and everything else. So I do think this is one of those areas where the cross-working between the three authorities, the common thread that the Public Protection Service brings into each of those authorities, actually does assist the wider effort in the authorities, if that makes sense.
I was just thinking maybe that we could suggest to the government that they ought to be really regarding the PPP as a single authority in its own right.
I think, Chair, if I may, the difficulty is if you look at what the purpose of RIPA is, or the Act, is that effectively the Human Rights Act, if you go back to Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, it gives a right to privacy. And Article 8 basically, but it's what's called a qualified right. So in effect, basically that right to privacy can be breached in certain ways lawfully, basically, and one of those reasons basically is the investigation of serious crime. So the difficulty, the reason why it couldn't basically apply necessarily to the PPP as an entity is it would be the individual local authorities that would be breaching that right to privacy. And that's what would be actionable. But as I say, what we have done is we've come to arrangements with the inspectors. So of the three authorities, basically, the inspector I met at Wokingham dealt with the Wokingham one. I had the discussions about the arrangements for PPP. And in fact, actually, the inspector that we had for Bracknell Forest and for West Berkshire was the same inspector. So by the time I met him at the second inspection, he was very, very familiar with the arrangements. And we have come to some sort of arrangements about how we deal with basically that interconnectivity between the authorities.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor James Cole has his hand raised, Chairman.
Sorry?
Councillor James Cole
Yes.
has his hand up.
Okay, Councillor James Cole, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is kind of a follow-on from what Sean's just been talking about, because I was curious about the use of what I guess we can call a CHIS. We're told that intrusive surveillance can't be authorised, and that includes 4223, the use of a CHIS where materials subject to legal privilege is likely to be obtained. How do you assess that sort of thing in advance to keep the PPP within the law? What happens if a CHIS in the course of an approved activity unintentionally runs into something else that's not part of the approved CHIS activity? For the sake of argument, they run into a drugs ring. Is the CHIS instructed to back off and hand over to police?
So, Chairman, if I may, I think the important thing to bear in mind here is that for any process, so the CHIS approval process goes through careful and sort of rigorous oversight from a senior officer. So that the principle here would be is when we seek approval in the first place to instigate a CHIS, we would be making it very clear what our objectives were. So in the event that it came forward to Sean, for example, or another senior officer for approval, we would be very tight on the objectives of the information we were seeking to obtain. And if at any point it was discovered or forthcoming that we were finding out information that was beyond the objective, then a decision is taken at that point to say, right, this process is no longer meeting the objective, shut it down. And if we needed to declare any information that had been obtained that was of interest to other parties, then we would do so through the appropriate channels. And that, again, all of that, the information would be retained as part of our audit trail so that when we get audited the next time, we can make it very clear that we've taken all the right steps. And again, what it also does for future authorisations would be to say, what was it about the permissions, the objectives, and the execution of that CHIS application that led to us finding out information that we didn't want? So again, every time we're building that picture of learning so that we narrow, so it should be absolutely precise on what we're trying to achieve.
You can keep it within the tramlines. Okay.
Yeah.
Chair, if I just may add to that, I mean, the forms basically that we complete, basically the officers completed, they were looking at such operations, talk them through those considerations. So it's not just about the risks of bumping into kind of privileged material, but collateral intrusion, all of those other things. And we just have basically systems in place to manage that. I mean, occasionally, basically, these things, not in this setting, but for example, in a setting where you're seizing goods or information, basically, you can come across, for example, privileged material. But the officers handling that material know full well, basically, what the system is in place for what they need to do if they come across that. And we have a system for handling that. And it again, basically, I mean, it's a complex area, but it's very tightly managed, particularly this stuff around privileged material and intrusion, knowing the limits of it all.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any other questions?
No, all right. No other hands are raised. No.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll need a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation on page 27, Stephen.
Councillor Bowring, proposal. A seconder, please. Councillor, here we come. Thank you.
Thank you. Want to read the recommendation?
Yeah, and the recommendation is that the committee note the information in the report. To note only, so there's no need to vote on this one.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. It's noted. Over to item number 8 then in that case, PPP COVID-19 responses and service update. That's pages 67 to 106. And Sean Murphy. Over to you, Sean. Sean, you're muted.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is, I suppose, third in a series. It's third part of the trilogy. So we started back in June with the update on what we've been doing since April. We got an update in September. this is the third update basically for the committee. It serves really to cover three issues. One of them is the Public Protection Service response to COVID, and we've talked a little bit about how the story has developed since the September meeting. So since then, we've had various kind of incarnations of regulations that control businesses. We've seen the further embedding in some of the contact tracing work that we've been doing. And obviously, more recently, we've had the lockdown and then the reopening the tier system. That could well change potentially again tomorrow, basically the implications for the service. And really what the report does, it sets out the various work streams. So outbreak investigation, business support, compliance checks, and all of that's gone on. And gives some indication basically of the volume of that, because obviously the volume of that type of work also has an impact on other aspects of the service which perhaps aren't getting delivered to the same extent as we would normally do in normal times. For example, some of the work around inspections. The second part of the report basically gives a kind of summary of some of the performance data. So that's the first appendix in there. It gives you some of the indications of volume, so you can see that some of the volumes have gone up, but also some of the volumes, for example, temporary rent notices and things like that have gone down. It gives sets out where we are with things like response times at this point. And obviously, as you can see from that, basically most of the roles are either green or they're orange, and we expect them basically to come back within by the time we report Q3 performance, and certainly by the end of the year. The third bit of the report deals with the case management unit. So at the last meeting, we did mention the case management unit, and there was a suggestion that maybe we could come back with just a bit more information. Now, I think the question that Councillor James Cole asked was about costs, and that is very difficult to ascertain on a case-by-case basis. Because obviously some of the cases literally take 3 or 4 hours to review and maybe an hour or two to prosecute, running through to cases that take a significant longer period of time depending on the complexity of those. But what this does is it set out basically the kind of level of work that's being conducted by the case management unit, you know, and the resource basically that's in that unit, so you can get some indication of you know, the work and the throughput of it. And obviously basically that obviously deals with the cases themselves, but actually some of the issues we've talked about tonight, things like RIPA, some of the considerations, warrants, all of those other things basically where they're involved. And in particular at the current time, as I'm going back to the main body of the report, they're involved basically in helping advice on the regulatory changes that are taking place, constantly taking place around COVID, business restrictions on people, but also things like drafting, things like notices, prohibition notices, improvement notices, and that type of thing. And then the final bit, basically, which we always like to give the committee an indication of, is the update on around communication. And as you can see, basically, although it varies from month to month, and I think those variations are primarily linked to basically when there's been a change in the law or a change in the guidance. But in fact, actually, the website of the Public Protection Service, which is a website shared across the 3 authorities, has become a bit of a kind of go-to place for information for businesses and for the public. And there's a bit there also about the social media. And what we do know is that actually a number of the stories, for example, are picked up by local media. And very helpfully, the local media play a very important role in this in terms of getting some of these key messages out about things like scams and some of the warnings and bits of information we're trying to get out to businesses and to residents. A lot of those are being picked up on social media as well. So I think it's just really to give a feel of where we are. There are a number of recommendations that actually are in the report. If I could just return to that, it's quite difficult. So one of them is basically the noting of the role that we're playing. But I was going to propose, Chair, if I may, that we add a further recommendation tonight, which is one that, which is that effectively that we give the Joint Management Board oversight, particularly as we move into the next quarter, of the prioritisation within the service, because obviously we don't know what's going to happen. We know that rates are rising locally. We've got Christmas coming up, and then obviously we'll move into January. We don't know what restrictions are going to be in place. We don't know what the workload of the service is, and we just really basically need to have that oversight of the private prioritisation of the service. There's quite a lot of facts and figures in there in terms of the amounts of work that we're doing and everything else. But I'll stop there and take questions if I may, Chair.
Thank you, Sean, for that update. I'm reasonably comfortable with that additional recommendation. Can I ask, first of all, or invite members to ask any questions of Sean, please?
No hands raised thus far, Chairman, on this one. Tell a lie, Councillor James Cole.
Councillor James Cole, please go ahead.
It's not a question, it's just a simple statement. Yes, I did read the fact that I had case management in there. Thank you for adding it. It's clearly becoming a useful unit, and we'll look forward to more information in due course.
Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to request a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations on page 67, including the one that Sean has just mentioned.
Before doing so, Chairman, Councillor Hilary Cole has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Roll it up in the proposal. I propose that we accept this report and the recommendations, and I'd just like to I think we ought to minute our thanks to the Public Protection team for the outstanding work that they've been doing, and particularly working with public health colleagues during this pandemic, through this crisis. The work has been outstanding, and I think we should say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Be delighted to second that.
Thank you. I will feed that back to staff. Very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, okay. Over to you, Stephen, to read the recommendations, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, recommendations are as follows. The committee notes the role the PPP are playing across the councils with respect to COVID-19 response. That the status of non-COVID related service delivery, including the quarterly performance report, be noted. The committee notes the update on the case management unit. The committee resolves to receive a further update at its March meeting on progress. And the additional recommendation for the committee to delegate to the Joint Management Board oversight of service prioritisation in light of the prevailing pressures on the service as a result of the need to have a dynamic response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Please can members indicate by raising their hands their acceptance of the recommendations. Unanimous, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. On to item number 9. Any other items which I consider to be urgent, and there are none. And following that, then can I say thank you very much for your kind attendance and your contributions, and that the business of the meeting is concluded and we are ready to close the meeting.